They said she was just another pop star, another pretty face who would eventually fade into the noise. But Rihanna never played by the rules. From the very first time her voice cut through the static of the radio, she wasn't just singing, she was warning the world. She would not be defined by anyone else's script. The story most people know begins with music, but the story that really matters, the one that changed industries and rewrote the rules of celebrity, starts in a boardroom, with a betrayal, with a lawsuit. By 2012, Rihanna was already a household name. Chart-topping hits, magazine covers, sold-out arenas. But behind the scenes, something far uglier was unraveling. Her own management, the team she trusted with her career, her finances, her future, had been making deals behind her back, quietly siphoning money, mismanaging millions, and making decisions that risked everything she'd built. She was just 24. When the numbers started not adding up, Rihanna did what few celebrities dared. She sued. Not a tabloid-friendly fight with a fellow artist. No scandalous love triangle. No public breakdown. This was strategic, cold, calculated. She filed a $35 million lawsuit against her former accountants, accusing them of negligence, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. Her team fired back with a simple claim: she spent too much. That was their defense. That her lifestyle, not their mismanagement, had cost her millions. But Rihanna wasn't playing defense. While the legal battle simmered, she stayed quiet. Not because she was afraid, but because she was planning, strategizing, watching the machine from the inside, and more importantly, learning how to build her own. Because while the world debated whether she was reckless or victimized, Rihanna was asking a different question. What if I never let anyone control my money again? That's the moment everything changed. In the silence that followed the lawsuit, Rihanna disappeared from the charts. Fans whispered about retirement. The industry moved on. But Rihanna wasn't retreating. She was rebuilding, studying the game, watching how power really moved. Not on stage, but in meetings, mergers and margins. She wasn't here to be managed anymore. She was here to become the manager. The first thing she did was restructure everything. New financial advisors, new legal team, and behind closed doors, a new vision was forming. One that would flip the script not just for her, but for every woman who'd ever been underestimated. While the court drama dragged on, Rihanna quietly partnered with LVMH, the luxury empire behind Louis Vuitton, Dior, and Fendi. Most artists slap their name on a perfume and call it branding. Rihanna wasn't interested in licensing. She wanted ownership. In 2017, she launched Fenty Beauty, not as a vanity project, but as a statement. And that statement was clear. If you won't include us, we'll build it ourselves. 40 foundation shades, for every skin tone, especially the ones the beauty industry had ignored for decades. Women who had spent years mixing products on the backs of their hands suddenly found their exact match. And they weren't just buying makeup. They were buying into something far deeper. Representation, respect, revolution. The launch shattered expectations. In its first month, Fenty Beauty made over $100 million. Sephora stores ran out of stock. Social media exploded. But this wasn't a fluke. It was a perfectly orchestrated campaign, years in the making. And the irony, the lawsuit, the betrayal that once threatened to ruin her, had become her greatest education. Rihanna had learned where the traps were, how deals are structured, how money is moved, and more importantly, how it's lost. She would never be taken advantage of again. But she wasn't done. Because once you've rebuilt yourself from a lie, you don't stop at breaking even. You build an empire. The success of Fenty Beauty wasn't just financial. It was cultural. For decades, the beauty industry had whispered the same thing to women of color. You don't belong here. Rihanna didn't whisper back. She shouted, and the world listened. Women who had been invisible suddenly felt seen, not as an afterthought, but as the standard. Rihanna hadn't just released a product. She had exposed an industry blind spot, and more than that, she had created demand where others saw no value. That wasn't luck. That was vision. Behind every photo shoot, every product drop, every shade name, there was a strategy. Rihanna understood something most CEOs forget. When you come from the outside, you see the cracks better than anyone. And if you're bold enough, you can break the whole thing open. The numbers didn't lie. By 2018, Fenty Beauty had raked in over $550 million. And Rihanna, she wasn't just the face, she was the founder, the owner, the architect. But she didn't stop with makeup. Next came Savage x Fenty, a lingerie line built with the same philosophy: inclusion, diversity, and disruption. Because just like beauty, fashion had gatekeepers. They decided who was sexy, who was desirable, who deserved to be celebrated. Rihanna burned the gate down. She cast plus-size models, trans models, disabled models, not as a statement, but as the new normal. And when the Savage x Fenty show debuted, it didn't look like a Victoria's Secret runway. It looked like the real world. Glorious, chaotic, unapologetic. A celebration of every kind of body, every kind of beauty. She wasn't selling lingerie. She was selling liberation. And as the brand soared, the courtroom battle that had once threatened to define her came to a quiet end. In 2014, Rihanna settled the lawsuit against her former accountants for a reported $10 million. But by then, that number didn't matter. She had already turned that betrayal into a blueprint. She had gone from chasing checks to signing them, from being managed to building management teams, from lawsuits to legacy. Still, the press kept asking, when is Rihanna coming back to music? But they were missing the point. Rihanna was no longer waiting for a Grammy. She was building generational wealth. And not just for herself. She hired women. She empowered creatives. She opened doors that had been welded shut. And she did it all without asking permission. Because when you've been sued, betrayed, and underestimated, and you still rise, you stop asking, you start commanding. Fenty wasn't just a brand, it was a battleground. Every product, every campaign, every launch was a quiet war against every person who had ever told her to stay in her lane. But Rihanna had already bulldozed the lanes. She was building highways that led straight to something almost no entertainer ever achieves: billionaire status. In 2021, Forbes officially declared Rihanna a billionaire, the richest female musician in the world. But the most remarkable part, less than 10% of that wealth came from her music. This wasn't a fluke. It was a calculated, deliberate pivot. Rihanna had turned her pain into product, her silence into strategy, her lawsuit into leverage. And now, she wasn't just playing the game, she was rewriting the rules. But success, especially this kind, comes with a price. As Rihanna's empire expanded, so did the pressure, the expectations, the whispers. In the same way the media once questioned her ability to sing, now they questioned her ability to lead. She's a pop star pretending to be a CEO. She got lucky. She'll lose focus. But Rihanna didn't flinch. Because when you've spent years fighting for control over your own name, you don't give it up to doubt. You wear it like armor. She wasn't trying to prove herself anymore. She was already proving what was possible. Still, she knew something else too. Legacy wasn't built just on product lines or magazine covers. Legacy was built on impact. And that's where Rihanna's story took another unexpected turn. In 2012, the same year she filed the lawsuit, she also founded the Clara Lionel Foundation, named after her grandparents. At first, it was quiet, modest, the kind of charitable footnote that celebrities attach to their names. But Rihanna wasn't interested in appearances. She was interested in outcomes. While tabloids chased her love life and speculated about albums, Rihanna was funding cancer treatment in Barbados. She was partnering with global organizations to provide scholarships for students across the Caribbean and Africa. She was building schools in Malawi. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, she moved faster than governments, donating over $36 million to frontline efforts, PPE access, domestic violence shelters, and vaccine equity, all while running a billion-dollar business, all while ignoring the noise, because she understood something fundamental. True wealth isn't what you have. It's what you give. And she didn't give because she had to. She gave because she remembered what it felt like to be the girl from Barbados, walking into rooms where no one looked like her. What it felt like to ask for help. What it felt like to be treated as disposable by systems, by advisors, by industries. And so she made a promise to herself. If I ever get power, I'll use it to open the door behind me. And she did. The Clara Lionel Foundation became one of the most agile and effective celebrity-led organizations in the world. It didn't wait for headlines. It moved with intention. It stepped in where governments failed, and it kept growing, just like Rihanna, quietly, consistently, with undeniable force. But even as the world began to see her not just as an artist or entrepreneur, but as a philanthropist, the old questions still echoed. Where's the album? When are you coming back? It's a strange kind of burden, to give the world more than most people dream of, only to be constantly asked for something else. But Rihanna understood something deeper than fame, something more lasting than applause. She had made peace with silence, because she knew that while music had launched her, it would never define her. She loved the art, but she didn't need the validation. Not anymore. And when she did return, in 2023, at the Super Bowl no less, she returned on her own terms, pregnant, powerful, poised, floating above the crowd in a crimson jumpsuit, commanding the largest stage in the world, not as someone desperate for a comeback, but as someone who had already won. Because by then, Rihanna wasn't just a performer. She was a blueprint, a living case study in how to reclaim your narrative, how to take back your name, how to turn loss into leverage, betrayal into blueprint, and lawsuits into legacies. And perhaps the most powerful part of it all, she did it without ever asking for permission. Rihanna didn't follow the rules because the rules were never written for women like her. So she built her own. With every Fenty launch, with every Savage X campaign, with every quiet donation, every radical shade of foundation, every cast of real bodies and real people and real love, she carved out a new path, not just for herself, but for everyone watching. And make no mistake, people were watching. Young girls who once only saw themselves in the background of beauty ads suddenly found themselves in the spotlight. Aspiring founders who thought they needed permission now saw a billionaire who started with none. And women everywhere, who had once been told, "Stay in your lane," now had living proof that lanes are made to be crossed. So no, Rihanna didn't bounce back from the lawsuit. She evolved. She grew teeth. She grew roots. She grew wings. And when the dust settled, she wasn't just the woman who sued her accountants. She was the woman who learned the system, beat the system, and then rebuilt it from scratch. The truth is, most people would have crumbled. A betrayal that deep, losing trust in the very people hired to protect you, it breaks something inside. It makes you question everything, your instincts, your judgment, your worth. But Rihanna didn't crumble. She took the pain, the confusion, the anger, and she turned it into clarity. She didn't just fire her old advisors and walk away. She sat at the table. She listened. She asked the uncomfortable questions. She learned about equity splits, distribution rights, warehousing costs, advertising margins. She read balance sheets the way she used to read lyrics. And in doing so, she unlocked something far more powerful than fame. She unlocked freedom. Because financial freedom doesn't come from making millions. It comes from understanding where every dollar goes. It comes from control, ownership, strategy. And that's what Rihanna mastered. She wasn't just partnering with brands. She was building them from the inside out. When she signed with LVMH, it wasn't for a quick check. It was a joint venture, a 50-50 split, an acknowledgement that she brought just as much value to the table as the oldest luxury conglomerate in the world. That kind of deal? Unheard of. But Rihanna didn't negotiate like a celebrity. She negotiated like a CEO. And when the pandemic hit in 2020, while other beauty brands struggled, while luxury labels scrambled, Fenty stood firm. Its digital-first strategy, built years before, paid off. Direct-to-consumer channels boomed. Savage X Fenty leaned into e-commerce, monthly memberships, and immersive experiences. The result? Savage X Fenty was valued at over $1 billion by 2021. Forbes estimated that Rihanna owned a 30% stake. Do the math. By this point, Rihanna wasn't just the richest female musician. She was among the wealthiest self-made women in the world, across any industry. And yet, she never bragged. No viral interviews breaking it all down. No podcast tour explaining her rise. No self-congratulatory Instagram captions. Because Rihanna didn't need to tell the world she'd won. The world already knew. But what truly set her apart, what made her story resonate on a level deeper than money or fame, was this: she never stopped being real. Through every stage of reinvention, from teenage singer to mogul, She stayed grounded. She stayed unpredictable. She stayed human. She wasn't polished to perfection. She swore. She laughed. She clapped back. She showed up to meetings with messy hair and hard questions. She admitted when she didn't know something. But she always learned, always adapted, always pushed forward. And people felt that. In a world of filtered facades, Rihanna gave people something rare: authenticity. That's why her brands didn't just sell. They connected. That's why her launches became movements. Why her silence carried more weight than other people's noise. Because every move she made felt like it came from a place of truth, earned, not inherited. And it's that truth that echoed in the minds of every woman who'd ever been told to stay in her place. Every young girl who was made to believe she couldn't own, couldn't lead, couldn't rise. Rihanna shattered that. She became the living embodiment of what happens when you stop shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's frame and start building your own canvas instead. And it all started with a betrayal, with a lawsuit, with a moment of no more silence, no more blind trust, no more giving away your power to people who never deserved it. That moment, that lawsuit, was never the end of Rihanna's story. It was the ignition, and what followed was not just a rise. It was a revolution. There's a moment in every great story where the hero becomes something more, not because they escape struggle, but because they embrace it. Rihanna's moment came not with a hit single or a runway show, but in a boardroom, surrounded by attorneys, contract clauses, balance sheets. It was there, in the fluorescent quiet of litigation and leverage, that she discovered her real superpower: discernment. Not just knowing what looks good, but knowing what works, what's fair, what's sustainable. She began to see the invisible architecture of business, who really held power, how wealth was protected, how empires were structured not on creativity, but on contracts. She studied, she listened, she hired experts, but never gave them blind authority again. She asked questions, she kept the receipts, and every time someone underestimated her, she took note. That was the turning point. Not when she launched Fenty, not when she hit billionaire status, but when she refused to be afraid of the system anymore. Fear had no place in her boardroom now. She began mentoring young entrepreneurs, quietly investing in startups led by women of color, using her seat at the table, not just for herself, but to pull up chairs for others. And slowly, something beautiful began to happen. The narrative shifted. People stopped asking, when's the next album? And started asking, how did she do it? Business schools studied her moves. Case studies emerged. Students wrote theses about Fenty's marketing model. Harvard invited her to speak. Forbes restructured their self-made women list to make room for what she had built. But Rihanna never claimed to have all the answers. She still made mistakes, still had launches that didn't hit, still said, I don't know, when something felt off. That's what made her human, and what made her story resonate even more. Because she wasn't a perfect icon. She was a flawed, fearless woman who refused to be broken. And that refusal, that quiet, persistent rebellion, became her legacy. She redefined what it meant to be a celebrity. She didn't just break into business. She dominated it. On her terms, with her face, her culture, her accent, her rules. And that, perhaps, is the most radical part of all. She didn't change who she was to succeed. She succeeded by being more of who she was. A Caribbean girl who turned global mogul, a pop star turned billionaire investor, a fashion disruptor, a philanthropic force, a quiet strategist behind a loud world. And it all came from a single moment of clarity. No one is going to protect me the way I can protect myself. She took that pain and turned it into power. She took that lawsuit and turned it into a launch pad. She took everything they said she couldn't do and did it louder, smarter, better. And now she's untouchable. Not because she's unreachable, but because she's unshakable. She owns her time, her image, her legacy. She doesn't need to post daily to stay relevant. She doesn't need to release music to remain beloved. She doesn't need to explain herself to anyone, because her work speaks louder than any caption ever could. And as she stands at the helm of Fenty, Savage X, CLF, and whatever comes next, one thing is clear. Rihanna isn't just a brand. She's a blueprint for power in the modern age. So how does a girl from Barbados, who once sold clothes on the street to help her family, become one of the most powerful women in the world? She gets burned, and then she builds. That's the real heartbeat of this story. Not the billion-dollar valuations, not the glossy magazine covers, not even the record-breaking sales. It's the reclamation. Rihanna didn't inherit a fortune. She didn't marry into power. She didn't stumble into success. She took it, piece by piece, lesson by lesson, failure by failure. And perhaps, most important of all, she forgave, but never forgot. She didn't let the betrayal define her, but she used it. She let it sharpen her, refine her, wake her up. The people who tried to take from her only gave her something stronger in return. Clarity. That lawsuit didn't just win her money. It won her perspective. It taught her that you don't hand over your future to people just because they seem smarter than you. You don't step back because someone else claims to know the way. And if they try to silence you, you build your own mic. Rihanna's story isn't just about business. It's about agency, about knowing your worth before anyone else sees it, about trusting your voice even when it shakes, about being willing to start from scratch if it means never being used again. That's why her empire feels different. It's not built on hype. It's not a facade. It's built on earned sovereignty. And behind every product, every partnership, every post, there's that same girl. The one who refused to be reduced to a singer-turned-mogul. The one who never asked for the spotlight, but took it anyway, because she knew someone else would if she didn't. In a culture obsessed with overnight success, Rihanna reminds us of something deeper. Longevity is built in silence, in patience, in resilience. She could have stayed in music forever, played it safe, cashed the checks, released the hits, stayed in the lane that made her rich. But that's not who she is. She's not here to be liked. She's here to lead. And leadership, real leadership, requires risk. It means being misunderstood, criticized, doubted. But it also means building something bigger than yourself. That's what Rihanna has done. She's not just the face of her brands. She's their backbone. She's not just the icon, she's the infrastructure. She's the reason millions of women now walk into stores and see themselves represented. She's the reason startup founders cite Fenty as inspiration. She's the reason the industry had to evolve, not because it wanted to, but because she forced it to. And maybe, most powerfully, she's proof that what tries to break you can become the very thing that builds you. That betrayal can lead to brilliance. That pain can become purpose. That a lawsuit can become a legacy. Because in the end, Rihanna didn't just win the case. She won control of her money, of her image, of her future, of her story. And now, that story belongs to her, and to every woman who ever needed a reminder that you don't have to be perfect to be powerful. You just have to start refusing to shrink, like she did.